Welcome, dear viewers, to our format Natural Medicine. Today I am very happy again, because today a doctor is here again, where I can learn a lot. That's not always the case, but today I am particularly happy to have such a competence here in the house. It is a doctor from the region of Saarbrücken, who has totally convinced me about all these gold implants, which he can use to relieve pain, for people with arthrosis problems or people who are just before an operation. A person who is really at home in the field of environmental medicine and knows so much, is really a blessing for you and for me. And that's why I'm really happy today to analyze the topic of the intestine and the liver from a holistic medicine doctor. Stay tuned, we'll get started right away. Now I would like to introduce my guest, Dr. Harald Burgard. Welcome, dear Harald.
Dear Alexander, hello.
I'm looking forward to the next lecture. I feel like a student. It's a nice story for me too. Because that's how my job, my moderation, is just fun, when you can learn something and see that there is still so much deep, network knowledge that we haven't yet experienced. And that's why I'm happy to talk about the intestine and hear your views. And the connection between the intestine and the liver and the detoxification problems of the liver. And there's always a word coming up, namely the glutathione S-transferase. I still don't know exactly what that is. I just know that many people lack it and it's important that we have it. So the ball is with you.
Okay. Yes, dear Alexander, when you look at yourself like that, you can see that you are an absolutely clean person. Only if you look closely, you would see that there are bacteria everywhere. Hundreds, thousands of different types of bacteria on the skin, in the body and so on. That means we as humans are not alone, but 10 times as many bacteria live in us as we ourselves have cells. That means, if we talk about the intestine, we're talking about the intestinal microbiome. Everyone knows that by now. Everyone knows that there are bacteria in the intestine. But we also have them in other parts of the body. If we want to stay healthy, we don't just have to take care of ourselves, but also of all the other inhabitants. That they stay healthy. And then we quickly come to the topic of the intestine and the liver and so on. Because what is burdening us? What can lead to people coming and saying, I have a stomachache all the time, I have flatulence, I have a chronic inflammatory bowel disease, I have an irritable bowel, I'm constantly tired. What's going on there?
So the bacteria always have to be involved, right?
Yes, the bacteria and you. That's called the holobiome. So not just the microbiome, the foreign cells that live in and on us, but also your cells. If you take it all together, you have to keep everything healthy. You, your roommates. And there are many ways to get sick first. We smear deodorant under our arms, we use soap, we use perfume.
Disinfectant.
Disinfectant that kills all our roommates. But of course we also eat foods that are provided with colorants. We breathe in exhaust gas, we smoke, we drink alcohol. Many things that can damage both your cells and your roommates. If you drink a lot of alcohol now, the intestinal bacteria don't like that anymore. If you eat a lot of sugar, there are certain bacteria that love it and grow. But the others who don't need the sugar at all, but you need it, they suffer. If we come to the intestine now, we have a large number of roommates in the intestine and everyone has their task. And like in a state, everyone has a job, we have to do it all together. If some stick their heads out because one ate a lot of sugar, which then causes flatulence, for example, the flatulence generates alcohols that put a strain on the liver, then the others suffer from the alcohol production, from the gases that are produced. That means, if someone is sick, we always have to look at what toxins they have in their body. That's the environmental medicine job. Are you now burdened with PCB, with formaldehyde? Did you get any insecticides? Or did the winemaker inhale the stuff during the last spray? What makes you sick? Or what does glyphosate do? For example, we all know that by now. It doesn't directly damage our cells, but it damages your intestinal cells, which damages your metabolism. And why are these roommates so important to us? Well, your intestinal cells produce vitamins, they produce fats, they also produce energy, which is important for the intestinal wall. And if there is a disorder there, it can lead to the so-called leaky gut syndrome. Have you heard of it?
Sure, leaky intestines.
Leaky intestine, which means that our intestinal cells are usually close to each other and only let in what is allowed from the intestine into your body. That's a huge surface. We're talking about the size of a tennis court. And so that no foreign substances get into your body, 85% of your immune cells are behind the intestinal wall. And if there is now a leaky gut syndrome, i.e., a deficiency in the intestinal mucosa, then you can imagine that the intestinal wall cells are a little apart. And then toxins, undigested food, bacterial fragments, whatever, can get between the intestinal cells and your body. And behind that, the immune cells say, stop, we're having an inflammation or we're having an allergy to food. And now all the blood from the intestine flows to the liver via the portal vein. And that's where all the crap comes from. The inflammatory substances, everything.
So the second choice of protection is ultimately the liver, which takes out a lot of things again.
Exactly, it has to process the toxins. It has to make sure that your food is processed properly. But the more it has to work, the less it can take care of its own things. And in the liver, various problems can arise. You can get tired when the liver is overworked. You can overload and poison the liver cells. We just heard that the liver detoxifies, but not only the liver. Other organs, kidneys, etc. can also detoxify. Part of the detoxification takes place in the intestinal wall, as we know today. And you just mentioned the S-transferases. There are a variety of detoxifying enzymes that we humans have. NRD2 and SODs and whatever. It would be too complicated to list it all. But in order for these things to work, we need minerals. We need selenium, we need manganese, we need zinc, etc. Only then do they work, if they work at all. We just heard that these detoxifying enzymes, for example those for metals, are not even used in 50% of people. There are other detoxifying enzymes that are not even available for 20%, for 10%. So if you are one of those people whose detoxification is suboptimal, then it is all the more important for you to take enough minerals with you to improve the detoxifying enzymes.
Manganese, selenium, zinc. So you are actually doing a mineral status. You have an orthomolecular medical analysis and see is he actually containing enough minerals. But how do you know if I am a bad detoxifier or a good one? Are there also laboratory values? These are the things you said, these SODs and glutations and so on.
So there is a profile that can be done in laboratories, where you can see exactly how your detoxification status is. How are the individual enzymes with you? Are they fully functional? Are they partially weakened? Are they not active at all? You can do that, that's not a problem at all. It costs a little money, but from experience it is like this. If a patient comes and, for example, has a high metal load in the body, then that shows that he is not excreting the stuff sufficiently. So he probably belongs to those who belong to the worst detoxifiers.
But we have so much environmental toxins today, that means every patient, every healthy person, should be interested in being a good detoxifier.
Yes, absolutely. That is also necessary for survival.
So if I look at all the viewers at home who are healthy, they have to ask themselves, am I a good detoxifier? And I have to determine that now. And if I'm not, can I optimize it?
I can optimize it. I can't unbuckle it, but I can optimize it. And if I have already injected so much poison that I get sick, then I should take the poison out with procedures. We can do that nowadays too. To relieve the body again, to dismantle the mountain that has gathered.
You just mentioned the selenium zinc mangan. And I always hear that this is a big problem nowadays, that we have this deficiency one way or another.
Yes. So we have known for 30 years that the nutrients in the soils are getting less and less. We live in Europe, we have anyway, because of the glacial melting 40,000 years ago, little selenium in the soil. That was washed out. Then there is the fact that we use a lot of minerals due to stress. But it is important, for example, if you take in enough zinc, enough selenium, enough mangan, that also suppresses the absorption of toxic metals, which we also have in our food, like lead, like mercury, and so on. That means, if I take in enough minerals, I take in less toxins. But if I have enough minerals in my body, the detoxification is also better, because the enzymes also need these minerals. So that's a double effect. That's why we always look at all patients who are chronically ill. Do they have enough minerals? Do they have enough active vitamins in their body? And of course, what is their toxin load? But that's all very closely related. We always look at how the intestine is positioned. How is the bacterial composition? Are there indications of inflammation? Are there indications that the intestinal mucosa is leaking? Because if you correct it and treat it, it has been dense again. I can observe that very well from the conspicuous values.
I'm still a little bit stuck with the minerals. Can you actually make a general statement that we all have a little mineral deficiency and a mineral cocktail would do everyone good without laboratory values? Or would you supplement first with clear results?
Since I mostly treat patients who are ill, I always treat according to laboratory results. That means, if someone comes and has a bad selenium level, and the laboratory intervals are partly bad, then 50 micrograms per liter is normal. That's nonsense. The selenoproteins need 120 micrograms per liter. Below that, the detoxification is suboptimal. That means the optimal level is 120, 130, 140 micrograms per liter, and not 50, 60, 70, which is often shown as normal. Because patients who come to the doctor normally usually have a deficiency and then the intervals go down a lot. That means, we primarily treat patients, but I would always, especially with patients who are ill, with smokers, lots of stress, recommend that they take a reasonable trace element preparation. But of course, also occasionally have a look. What does it look like? Because of course I can also take too much. If I take too much zinc, I weaken my immune system, just like if I have too little. So every now and then, I'll have a look. If my values are right, it's probably not doing any harm. Quite the opposite.
But there are cocktails that contain almost everything: manganese, zinc, selenium, magnesium, calcium, potassium, and so on. That's also an electrolyte in the end, and gives you energy if you have enough minerals. And I didn't know if this was really available as a biofood at all. So selenium certainly not, right?
Yes, so basically that's right. Especially if you do a lot of sports, then it's also important if you sweat a lot, either hormonally, or because you work a lot. Then it certainly makes sense. With calcium, of course, you have to be a little careful. If someone calcium highly dosed, it can also cause damage. Yes, it's like everything in the body. I don't just use substances, but I also remove substances. If someone now, for example, says, I don't take magnesium because I actually have enough, but he drinks a glass of wine, then he eliminates a complete daily need of about 300 milligrams. If I drink 2 glasses of wine or a glass of beer, I have twice as much. If I do sports, if I play tennis, if it's hot in summer, if I have an exhausting job, then I lose magnesium. So I have to add it somehow. Either I can do it by eating healthy, reasonably, which we hardly manage today, or I supplement. Since I can't measure everyone, if not every patient goes to the doctor and measures them, magnesium is not a problem. It's not a problem with many other things either. But there are substances that you shouldn't overdo. Sometimes I have patients who come with exorbitantly high selenium values because they believe they have to eat 5 Brazil nuts every day and maybe add selenium otherwise. That's the same with everything. Too much is too much. I don't fill my car engine with 5 liters more engine oil because engine oil is healthy or good for the engine. Then it's just too much at some point and the engine breaks down because of that.
A nice example.
That's the same with everything. Too much is bad, but too little also.
I once read that the mother of all organs is the liver. Can you leave that sentence like that?
The liver is of course the chemical factory in your body. If the liver doesn't work, then a life is not possible. That's very clear. Since all the environmental dirt you absorb will eventually end up in the liver, and it primarily has to detoxify it, it is all the more important that the organ works. And for that we need minerals, trace elements, vitamins. For this we need functioning detoxifying enzymes. All that we have just discussed.
Can you also detox the liver? I mean, I can't just take it out and wash it. I really have to start processes from the outside so that the liver actually lets go of its toxin. But I also have to bind it right away. Otherwise, it goes back to another channel.
Yes, we have different detoxification systems in the liver. We have phase 1 of liver detoxification, in which the substances that detoxify the liver become even more toxic. That's why we call it the toxication phase. And in phase 2 it is actually detoxified. For this you need, for example, glutathione. For this you need detoxifying enzymes. For this you need selenium. For this you need other vitamins and trace elements. If this detoxification works well and you also drink enough water, then these substances are made water-soluble and then excreted via the gallbladder fluid via the intestine. This is how liver detoxification works. And you can support that by drinking a lot, of course, by taking bitter substances that stimulate the gallbladder fluid. That also includes drinking coffee sometimes. That also includes eating fat so that the gallbladder acids are stimulated via fats. That includes exercise, that includes sport, but of course it also counts that you have a reasonable diet and not as many toxins as possible. Because in the end, everything ends up in the liver and it has to get rid of it again.
So you almost never talk about the liver. So I don't hear about liver complaints, liver pain, or anything like that. But it works and works and works and does its best, and at some point it is exhausted.
Yes, the liver is an organ that doesn't hurt. What hurts is the liver capsule when the liver is swollen. The capsule has pain receptors, it hurts there, but the liver itself is completely painless. On the one hand. On the other hand, the liver is the organ that is most regenerative. So you can remove 5/6 of the liver and they grow back. Until you realize that your liver is not working properly, you can lose 70% of the liver cells. Only then you realize. So that's an incredibly regenerative, capable, high-performance organ. But like everything else, there are limits. You can break it too, if you drink too much alcohol or you are permanently overloaded with toxins. At some point the liver can also break down.
Well, as we said, liver cleansing is part of the topic. How do I get the leaky gut closed again, these intestinal glands that stretch to the side and trigger allergic reactions or even get the toxins through there? Because here the clue, if it were closed, nothing could happen.
So what does it do? What causes a leaky gut syndrome to develop? That's one of the many questions we have to ask ourselves. A leaky gut syndrome is caused, for example, when you put too many substances in the intestine, such as too much gluten through eating too much white flour, etc. Which then leads to the body having to defend it. If the body can no longer absorb that much gluten, then more zonulin forms as an immunological marker that tries to get this stuff out of the intestine again. And we know from the zonulin that it dissolves the connecting bridges that hold your cells together, these so-called thigh junctions. And then a leaky gut syndrome develops. Or if you drink too much.
Because the gluten sticks to it. Because it's protein, the gluten. It sticks to the intestine.
Yes, exactly. You can't absorb it. That's what the immunological process does. Gluten itself is not bad. But the problem is that people take too much of it. And that we have far too high amounts of gluten in wheat nowadays, so that it can be processed better by machines, etc. Only by the machine that is supposed to process it in the end, namely your intestine. It doesn't work anymore.
But that actually affects all of us about the same. Because everyone who really eats a lot of modern dough like bread, pasta, pizza, etc., then sticks this gluten to the intestine, and then leads to this leaky gut syndrome in everyone, short or long term.
Well, it depends a bit on how sensitive you are. There are people who tolerate everything. They can eat shoe nails, as they say. And then there are those who tolerate little and get sick quickly. But basically, yes. The longer such an overload lasts, the more damaging substances affected. So also sugar, alcohol, environmental toxins, also dyes, etc. The greater the risk that you get sick. And what we see, what I've been seeing for years, also what my wife found out in research, is that especially the Enterococcus, a special species in your intestinal microbiome, that they have to be promoted. Because they have the highest degree of ability to close the intestine again. And we always look, when I see how the composition is, that we give probiotics, i.e. intestinal bacteria, first supplement them temporarily, which are able to optimize the intestine in such a way that these inflammatory processes go back, if any are there, that the intestine becomes tight again. You can do all of that today. That's not a magic trick if you know where to look. But for that you need diagnostics again. That means I need a good test of the stool. I have to see in the blood what the zonulin value is. I have to see what the alpha-1 antitrypsin value is in the stool. I have to see what the secretory formation of mucus is, etc. There are various parameters that we can determine so that I know exactly where to start. And I have to look at what is the cause. If someone, for example, by a high lead, cadmium, mercury load, if he always gives the dirt into the liver, i.e., over the liver into the intestine, then I always poison my intestinal bacteria again and again. And I have to intervene there by various measures of the detoxification.
When I hear how complex it all is and how versatile, I'm just wondering, when a patient comes to you, is he there for a day?
So that's kind of like everything. What you do a lot and what you do often or what you only do, you can do relatively quickly and you're relatively fast with that. When a patient comes, we usually do a first conversation of 1.5 hours. Because we already know what's really going on. And then, of course, you do corresponding analyses. They just take a few days. When you have the results, you discuss with them and make a plan of how to treat the person. So you don't have to spend hours and days to analyze it. That's possible, of course, over a certain period of time, because the laboratories just need time to be able to verify all the stuff, to be able to measure, to be able to deliver the results. Yes, but that's all feasible today. In our Western world, we're lucky that we can do all of this.
And then it goes so far, actually up to a nutritional consultation, so that you actually start not eating additional stressors. It goes all the way to an environmental consultation to determine where are the environmental toxins that have contaminated me, ultimately.
Exactly.
So I keep coming across things in my life that I didn't know before. And here I have toxins again. And here I have something again that I shouldn't eat at all, and so on. Yesterday I heard about the ready-made soup, this bag soup, it has stuff in it, you should avoid that urgently. I thought, that's not possible. What are you still allowed to do?
You know, when you have a dog and you give him the wrong food, the hair falls off, he gets diarrhea and makes your carpet dirty. We eat everything in any amount and believe we can tolerate it. So if you have a bellyache or diarrhea or are constantly tired, then that's just the way it is. Then you say, look how old you are. And grandma had that too. And the liver values were already too high for your grandpa. From my point of view, it's all wrong. We need a proper nutrition. You don't have to make it complicated. You just have to look again, what is good for our body and what did our ancestors eat? They had meat once or twice a week. They had fish from time to time and they ate vegetables. They didn't burn it or any kind of canned food. They ate what grew in the garden. They ate it biologically. They just ate what grew and didn't throw anything on it. Because they didn't want to feed half the world with it, but themselves from their own garden. And that's a kind of nutrition. Only if we eat permanent fast food, if we eat ready-made foods, then we always have substances in it that are necessary so that the stuff lasts. You don't like to go to the supermarket and buy a toast bread that is already bad the next day. So something has to go in there that prevents something. If you normally buy bread, it's dry the next day. Then you can throw it away or make flour out of it. But that doesn't last 6 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 weeks. So something has to go in there. And all these additives are of course harmful to us at some point. For some more, for some less. That depends on your individual ability to detoxify.
But let's go back to our fellow inhabitants. And if I eat something that contains preservatives, what happens to my fellow inhabitants?
Well, it depends on whether you tolerate it or not. If I now take a vegetable, for example, that is glyphosate polluted. We find glyphosate in almost all patients now. Then you say, it doesn't harm my body, but it just harms the so-called shikimate pathway, the metabolism of the gut bacteria very well and can kill them. And then you have a problem. If your gut bacteria no longer work properly, you get no longer the right vitamins from the food. Then certain food is no longer sufficiently digested. And then you get sick at some point.
But again, if I have a can containing preservatives, then it's in there so that no bacteria can survive in here and can harm my food. And if I eat something that actually actively kills bacteria and they eat it, then I also break my gut. That means this holobion, as you say, suffers from eating consumed food.
Yes, of course. Eating conserved food, other substances.
What is not conserved nowadays? If you go to a grocery store, then it's
Everything that is processed, everything that is somehow chemically processed or made durable by other processes is of course changed and always has some additives in it that make the thing last longer or look better. Some dyes, some additives, you would never eat them if you saw in a bucket. But if they are then are not nicely prepared in front of you and you like the light pink piece of meat, then you eat it because it looks very good. But you don't look at the list of all the additives that are in there.
So let's summarize again. Gut complaints. You have to look at, on the one hand, the liver detoxification, to clean the liver, to make an detoxification, active detoxification with additives and so that the liver is good again. We get the leaky gut closed by preventing that even more of these stimulants are built up, i.e. gluten avoidance. That means a rigorous diet change.
Gluten avoidance. Yes, you have to look at what you tolerate. There are people who tolerate certain fruits that react allergic to apples. So everything that you react allergic to, you have to avoid.
But allergic reaction only comes after the leaky gut. That means only when it penetrates. But if I close it, the allergies should also be gone.
Usually, yes. Yes.
But we fight the allergies, but not the reason.
I've been treating patients for years. If someone has allergies, you look at what he's reacting to. But we always have to look what it is. We take the poison out, we treat the intestine, and we also treat the allergic reaction, for example with bioresonance procedures, so that it stops. And when it stops and the intestine stays closed, then they don't react to that stuff anymore. Because that's exactly the problem. As you said, if the intestine is not closed, then you can react to something at 80, which you have tolerated for decades. Because through the penetration at some point the body starts to react to these things. You need a first event for every allergy. That means now the apple goes through between the cells and then you react. Then the cells say, stop, if I see you again, I'll get an allergy. And the next time you eat an apple, it explodes. And that can happen to you in any age.
I'm just thinking, we learn so much at school, where I don't know what really made sense at school, which subject is really relevant now, from religious lessons to God knows what. But things like that, topics like that you bring up now, should be an active subject at school. How does the functioning body work? How do you get healthy? How do you stay healthy? That's what you have to pay attention to. That's school.
I have a lot of it in my book that will be released soon, written down because I have to explain a lot.
It's much easier to give the patient the book. Great. What's it called?
We haven't yet set the title. I have now written it down. We are now setting the title and also the individual names of the chapters. And there are all these things in there because I have to explain them so often. And so the patient can just read it.
Can you tell me one more word about effective microorganisms? How do you feel about this topic? Do you know it?
Yes, there are the probiotics. Effective microorganisms are everywhere. You can use them to clean. You can use them to disinfect by giving the good the bad.
Yes, great.
That's something we've known for decades. And we use it as doctors, of course, to give the gut the boost that things regenerate. It's not enough to only take in effective microorganisms, but you also have to feed them. So if I tell people, here, take probiotics, that's what these effective microorganisms are called that we need for regeneration. Then I also tell them, please eat something that is a feast for you. Eat walnuts, macadamia nuts, linseed oil, and so on. There are certain substances that we have proven in science that are a feast for them. For example, so-called resistant starches. When potatoes are eaten when they're cooled down, or when you have rice and you pick up a little rice, when it cools down, resistant starches of group 3 are formed. That's something you can't digest, but your gut bacteria, that's a feast for them. And if you give them something to eat, they'll stay. Then they'll love you. Then they'll stay with you. And they have to be fed.
Yes, and then the whole bacterial balance is restored. Everything harmonizes. You would have to talk a lot more about bacteria, but we still have this old worldview, I think from the 18th century, that you have to fight the bacteria because they are basically bad. And today we're still leading every word war against bacteria. We come with big guns and shoot.
The key is tolerance. We can't live without these bacteria. We have a lot of bacteria that can kill you in the body. For example, Clostridium. Clostridium can cause such a bowel inflammation that you can die from it. But if you don't have it, you'll get sick too. That means everything has to be in balance. The immune system, everything has to be in balance. It has to tolerate each other. And that's how it always is in society. If some people stretch their heads out and start terrorizing, then it goes wrong. But if everyone behaves nicely and gets along with each other, then the whole thing works. Same with the body.
You can also use the word viruses. Everything has to be in balance. And that's part of life.
I also give rare antibiotics for borreliosis and other things. Very rarely. Because you don't usually need it. If you eliminate the weakness of the immune system by eliminating toxins from heavy metals, if you give the body certain substances that drive up the resistances, then you get a balance in there and the body gets healthy again. I don't always have to kill everything. I have to create an immune balance.
Until you give antibiotics with your knowledge, where you can see that all the intestinal bacteria eventually also suffer again when I give an antibiotic. And then I have to build up for 3 years that the intestinal milieu is right again. I always say, if you take antibiotics, you don't know what you're doing.
There are situations where you have to do that.
Without a doubt.
But it is given too often. It is often given too uncritically. And you have to differentiate that very precisely. And if I give an antibiotic, then I always add a probiotic so that you can avoid up to 90% of the possible damage. Unfortunately, this is rarely done. There are more and more colleagues who know that now, thank God. But a very large part does not. And then you hit it with antibiotics. Maybe too uncritically, depending. And then damage the intestinal milieu often over the years. And you have to avoid that.
I've never heard of it either, that up to 90% of the damage is restorable.
But that is possible after the study. And we always do it. So if I have to give an antibiotic, I always add a probiotic. Usually even a combined variant. So more than one.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Med. Harald Burgard, that was it for you. Dear viewers, you have also seen that everything from the liver to the intestinal bacteria, to nutrition and so on, how it all plays together. But actually, everything is a bit logical. Because if we think about what nature has given us and how we actually take it as nature has given it to us, then we have the very best conditions to be healthy. Or if we are in a disease and orient ourselves how nature has given it to us, how we can get out of this valley of tears. That's right, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. All the best. See you next time and take care.